الفاتحة. بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي وابن مولاي. صلى الله عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. صلى الله عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميع شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم أئمة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما، فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا، وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First and foremost, I give my condolences to each of you on the occasions which we have come to commemorate over these past few nights, and tonight will be our last night to commemorate this together. However, this commemoration will continue, and that is the tragedy of the women and children in captivity after the shahadat of Imam Hussein, the Bani Hashim, and the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. And inshallah today we will conclude the topic which we began, and that is the topic of justice, which is a topic that is closely related to the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. That every point of that mission of Imam Hussein was to establish justice and to raise awareness about justice and our responsibility with regards to justice. And thus far we have mentioned and particularly as it is related to verse 135 of Surah An-Nisa, that's chapter 4 of the Quran, 135, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands us to be those who not only live by the principle of justice, but be those who establishes justice. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Be among those who not only establish justice, but those who are bearing witness and testifying. This is one of the traits and the qualities of those individuals who come forth to establish justice, that they are those who are shuhada. They bear witness and they testify for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, shuhada lillah. And as we mentioned last night, that they testify in favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but against those who do wrong and do injustice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's created you, as He says in verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 135 or 143, where He says that وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا أَن تَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. That He has created you the middle nation, the balanced nation, so that you may bear witness over mankind. وَيَكُونُ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. And the Prophet, he will be a witness over you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has placed this mission in our hand. And He has given us the best example of those who have gone forth, who've lived their lives by justice, the principles of justice, but they also fulfilled their duty and responsibility to raise the banner of justice. And this was the Prophet himself and his AhlulBayt, his family. And when we look at their life, we see that yes, they are the scale and they are the criterion of justice. Their life was based upon justice. And we gave the example of the UN report, the 2002 UN report, where they said, yes, if and of course their aim was at the Arab world, they said that, look, if you want to establish justice, but they recognize that the example of justice was Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi afdhalu salatu wassalam. That anyone who follows and who abides by his example will be able to establish justice. If everyone abided by that example, you will have social justice. That social justice, as we mentioned, is premised upon legal justice. Adlun tashri'iyyun. And of course, at the core of legal justice and at the core of the understanding of justice within Islam is adlun ilahiyyun, adlun takwiniyyun, is divine justice. So this is where we have what we have talked about so far. I want to couple this verse 135 of Surah An-Nisa, with another verse that has almost a similar tone as verse 135 of Surah An-Nisa. But it points out a slightly different aspect, but nonetheless it is one that is necessary for anyone who wants to live their life by the principles of justice and fulfill their duty and their responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being the champions of justice, by being those who establish justice. And this is verse 8 of Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5 of the Quran, verse 8, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Again, He starts it the same way as He starts 135. O you who believe, those of you who claim that you have faith, you claim that you have accepted La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah, and particularly in our case where we say that we accept the wilayat of the mu'mineen and the AhlulBayt, you claim Ashhadu anna Aliyyun waliyullah, who is the example of justice after Rasulullah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts with that O you who believe, kunu qawwamina lillah, shuhada bil qist. Here is a slight difference. In verse 135 of Surah An-Nisa, he says, كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Be those who establish yourselves and found your life upon justice. شُهَدَاء لِلَّهِ. And bear witness and testify for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in verse 8 of Surah Al-Ma'idah, he says, كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ لِلَّهِ. Be those who establishes yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shuhada bil qist, who bear witness and testify for justice. So what is the difference? And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we mentioned before, again, this is fasaha, this is the eloquence. And every word that is used in the Quran is with precision and for a reason. كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله. كونوا قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط. In order to be, again, that ummatan wasata, that middle nation that bears witness for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the rest of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, meaning that you're going to bear witness that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent was truth, haqq. To bear witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever He sent, was the laws, again, based on adl ilahi or adl tashri'i, legal justice, which is premised upon divine justice. You were to bear witness that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent forth, that if we enact it, it will create social justice. So in one moment He's saying to be those who erect this, be those who are acting on justice. Then in another instance He says, base your life upon your devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qawamina lillah Shuhada bil qist, and you bear witness and you testify to justice. That when you see justice being implemented and being established, bear witness to that justice. When you see injustice happening, don't remain silent and face those injustices. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, if we take both of these verses and go back and look at these verses, and subhanAllah, you see that, yes, they complement each other. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in both of these verses, He explains two things. And these are perhaps two very principal things that will divert a person from justice and establishing justice. In verse 135 of Surah An-Nisa, after He commands us to establish justice and to bear witness for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He says, فَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَىٰ أَن تَعْدِلُوا. He says, don't follow your low desires, whereby you won't be just. So one of the things that will divert an individual from justice is following his own desire. Or what we can say today, if you want to understand that in today's term, and how individuals they interact, or even how, unfortunately, a lot of countries they interact this way. They say, well, we are doing this, or we're making this policy and creating that policy or international. Why? Not because it's just, because it's in our interest. This hawa is personal interest. Not that what is happening is just. So, well, my interest is, or our country's interest is this. Whether it's just or not just, whether people's rights are being trampled or not being trampled, doesn't make a difference to me. As long as we come out of the situation on top and our interests are safeguarded. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that if you apply this rule in your life, you'll never be just. And you won't establish justice. Because you're not looking at the other individual as, oh, this individual has rights, and I should implement those rights. And this is why in verse 135 He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says establish that justice, He says, وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. You start with yourself first, in order to get rid of the hawa al-nafs. And this is exactly what Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi but he advised Malik Ashtar when he sent him to Egypt. He says, remove your nafs from the equation. He said, you want to establish justice in the place that you're governing? He says, don't follow your nafs. He says, فَإِنَّ النَّفْسَ أَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. He says, your nafs will guide you towards what is wrong. Because you will not be looking to establish justice, you will just go after your own interest. He says, so put that aside. So one of the things that diverts people from establishing justice is interest, their self-interest. If we remove it, we can establish justice. The second thing, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 8, and I just want to make this clear. In verse 135, He says, start with yourself, and even if you have to implement justice, you must implement justice.